chapter 20. The setting is the day of Christ's resurrection. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, meaning the religious authorities, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." But Thomas, who was called the Twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him about what had happened. "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, Jesus' disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them this time. And although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Thus ends the reading of the word.
Thanks be to God.
In 1996, my mother and I took the Yangtze River Gorges cruise in China. You know, when they were going to dam up the Yangtze River, and everybody said, "This is your last chance to travel on the Yangtze River." So my mom and I, in 1996, before Hong Kong became part of China, she and I took the Yangtze River Gorges cruise, and we traveled for 7 days on the river, and we made some very interesting stops along the way. We saw the hanging coffins. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the hanging coffins, but as you go up one of the rivers, you look up into the rocks, and there are coffins embedded 75 and 100 feet up in the high rock cliffs, and everybody says, "Gosh, I wonder how they got there." And then somebody says, "Well, because the river was probably that high that many years ago when the coffin, got it?" They didn't have a crane, in other words. So we saw the hanging coffins, and we also made an evening stop at the Chinese ghost city of Fengdu. It was actually a temple built during the Han Dynasty between the years 2006 before the Common Era and 220 of the Common Era. And part of the effect of visiting this temple is going at night. It's supposed to be scarier then. Well, in the Chinese vision of the afterlife, the dead must undergo 3 major tests to enter the netherworld. These tests are taken at 3 locations in this particular temple. I don't know about any other temples, but in this particular temple, there are the 3 tests. And one of them is the Nothing to Be Done Bridge, also called the Helplessness Bridge. And you pass across that bridge, then the next thing you pass over is the Ghost Torturing Pass, and then you go to the Son of Heaven Palace. And these are the 3 tests to find out whether or not you're going to be able to go to heaven. So the nothing to be done bridge, or the bridge of helplessness, is determined whether the individual crossing it was a good person or a bad person. It was built during the Ming Dynasty, or the Han Dynasty, and it was built on Ming Mountain. The bridge connects the netherworld with the real world, and it is that testing point for good and evil. Of course, all the tourists get to walk across it. The middle arch, there are 3 arches. The middle arch is the testing arch. And there are different protocols for crossing the bridge, depending upon your gender, age, or marital status. Below the bridge are square-shaped pools of water. Virtuous people will pass over the bridge without any obstacle. Bad or villainous, naughty people will fall into the pools below. The other 2 arches are called the golden and silver bridges, respectively, and when preparing to leave, all the tourists are encouraged to pass along either one of these 2 bridges, and it'll bring you good luck. The ghost torturing pass is kind of like a hallway that you go to. It is the second test before entering the netherworld. And it is said that this is the place where the dead report to Yama, the king of hell, for judgment. And in front of the structure there are 18 sculptures that are depicting ferocious demons. If you look up Chengdu City, or the ghost city of China on the internet, you'll see some of the pictures of these grimacing action characters. The third test takes place before the Son of Heaven Palace. In order to evade hell, the ghost must stand on the stone at the front of the gate of the Palace of Heaven with 1 foot. And you have to stand on 1 foot for 3 minutes. A good person will be able to do this, while an evil, rotten person cannot, and will be sent to hell. It's good that these things are so simple. Now, you're wondering, why is she talking about ghosts? Egypt, Rome, Greece, Mesopotamia, India, and China all had rich ghost cultures. Their beliefs varied, of course, but for the most part, ghosts were scary entities that were once people, but who died, and for some reason have either not crossed over into the netherworld where they belong, whether heaven or hell, or they have come back for some reason, probably to communicate something to the living or do harm to those who harmed them when they were still alive. In the midst of cultures rich with ghost stories, these post-resurrection passages that are found in John and Luke appear. Mark's chapter 6, verses 45 to 52, Matthew's chapter 14, verses 22 through 33, and John's chapter 6, verses 16 through 21 are 3 versions of the story of Jesus walking on the water to rescue his disciples caught in the stormy Sea of Galilee. In both the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Matthew, the disciples thought that Jesus was a ghost, which is interesting because they'd just seen him a few hours ago, and he was alive. So that's kind of a funny story. But the statement is made, nevertheless, by the author that the disciples, when they saw Jesus walking on the water, were terrified at the sight of him. It was when he said, "It is I, do not be afraid," that they stopped being terrified, and they wanted to take him into the boat. In all of those scenarios, Jesus was not dead to their knowledge. The Greek word translated in Matthew and Mark stories as ghost is phantasma. It means an appearance, an apparition, a specter. When we hear the word ghost, these 2,000 years removed from the stories, we think of ectoplasmic beings who belong in another world. Depending upon the stories one has read, ghosts range from being the walking dead, zombies, to foggy likenesses of someone who used to be alive but has not crossed over into the nether regions because of some unfinished business here on Earth. We loved the movies and the television shows like Topper. picking up residence in his home. Or that wonderful story with Abbott and Costello, who are, well, Blithe Spirit was a comic play that was written by Noel Coward in 1941. That has enjoyed repeated revivals, both on stage and in film, on television, as recently as 2014. Everybody loves the annoying ghost of the first wife who drives the second wife crazy. Those ghost hunter shows that are popular with a particular segment of the population. But for the most part, folks don't really believe in ghosts nowadays, do they? Stories about them are required on children's camping trips. For some reason, it's a tradition. A ghost is an apparition by definition, but for some reason, authors didn't think that word on its own conjured up the vision they were seeking, so they turned the word ghost into an adverb to describe a ghostly apparition. It's the same thing. Now, an apparition is simply defined as an appearance. Like Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, his appearance was changed. In Mark, Jesus' clothes were dazzling white, and Elijah and Moses made an appearance with him. In Matthew's version of the story, the appearance of Jesus' face changed. His face shone like the sun, and the appearance of his clothes changed. They became dazzling white. And Moses and Elijah also put in an appearance and were talking with Jesus. In Luke's version of the Transfiguration, the appearance of Jesus' face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. The key word here being appearance. So, what or how was the appearance of Jesus on the evening of the resurrection viewed by the disciples? Imagine how the already skittish disciples would respond to the appearance of Jesus on the very day of his reported resurrection. This whole visitation in the Gospel of John has such magical elements. It reflects perhaps a cultural fascination with the world of ghosts in ancient times. We don't get fascinated by that kind of stuff today. Do we? I was just talking to David. He was telling me how Alex has just fallen in love with J.B. Robb's books. Come on. Magical books, magical stories. How many of you as adults read Harry Potter? Yeah, I knew it. How many of you went to the movies? We love this stuff. We love this magical mystery stuff. This whole visitation in the Gospel of John is full of magical elements. It reflects this culture. John purposely tells the reader that the house where the disciples are hiding from the religious authorities is shut up tight. The doors are locked. The windows are locked. There's no way for anyone to get in. However, in this story, there's no knock at the door. No unlocking of the door. No opening of the windows. Everything's shut up tight. Just John's statement that Jesus was suddenly standing among the disciples. John does not use the term that the apostles and does not confine the vision of the risen Christ to the eyes of just the remnant male disciples. He uses all the disciples. All of the men and women are present there in this moment in time. All of those people who followed Jesus up to Jerusalem. This is not just a small grouping of a couple of men. I have to tell you, if I was there seeing this, hearing the words, "Peace be with you," would not stop my knees from knocking or my heart from racing. I would not be sure at all what was happening and what I was seeing. Remembering that the gospel writers tell different stories about the event at the tomb, the women who went to the tomb in John's gospel have reported the empty tomb to the rest. Peter and John He doesn't use the Greek word phantasma. He doesn't use the Greek word for appearance. He uses the Greek word erkomai for Jesus being present in the house on the evening of his resurrection. The word has a wide range of meanings, one of which is to make one's appearance. Other definitions are to come into being, to arise, to come forth, to show one's self. So the word erkomai is not a word that means came and entered into a place. Rather, it means Jesus made his appearance among the disciples. No matter of fact, vision is this. It is magical. Now the scene continues with Jesus showing the disciples his hands and his side. Now, I couldn't find any scholarly evidence that ghosts bear the marks of the form of death. But I remember vividly the image of Charles Dickens' characterization of the ghost of Jacob Marley, who carries and drags the heavy chains that he forged in his life around with him when he's dead. Remember that? You've seen the Christmas Carol. You remember the sound of the chains. John intends that the gesture of Jesus showing his hands and his side proves that Jesus is not a ghostly apparition, but rather this is Jesus in the flesh. Telling the story with one of the disciples absent, I think, is so sophisticated on John's part. Why do this? Why leave poor Thomas out of the loop? Because I believe Thomas is the everyman. Thomas is the every woman of the gospel stories. I've said this before. Thomas is the one who takes the risk of looking foolish because he requires an answer to his questions. He is a man who is not so much a doubter as he has been tagged throughout history. He is a man who is you and me. He acts for us. He stands for us among the disciples who were present when Jesus appeared to them and is devastated at his exclusion for whatever reason. I want you to picture yourself standing with Thomas, not with the other disciples looking sadly at him as he says, I will not be convinced until I see the nail marks, put my finger in them, and put my hand in his pierced side. Thomas didn't see this happen at the crucifixion, neither did any of the other male disciples, except perhaps John. He didn't witness the crucifixion. He has heard about this from the women. The other disciples must have described Jesus' appearance in detail so that Thomas would be convinced that what they saw was real. The subtlety of this story cannot be lost on us. When Jesus appears to Thomas, just for Thomas, a week later, he specifically invites Thomas to touch the very place that Thomas said he would need to touch in order to believe that Jesus was alive in the flesh and not a ghostly apparition. Who reported that to Jesus? Much artwork of the encounter between Thomas and the risen Christ depicts two men in the flesh. Jesus is not depicted in every setting surrounded by a radiance or a heavenly light. He's just a man in the flesh. I think it is important that we don't look down our noses at Thomas or think that the risen one has chastised him for his desire to see. I think John's Jesus is commissioning Thomas and all of the others when he says, blessed are those who have not seen and yet who have come to believe. The hint here is that those who have not seen cannot come to believe unless a person of faith is willing to share the story with them. These disciples of Jesus are in this moment being commissioned this day to tell the story. What we must ask ourselves is if our belief in the story is strong enough to help others come to believe. Our faith is not meant to be our possession so much as it is meant to be a gift we share. And that is what I think the risen Christ was saying to Thomas, who in legend did take the story out into the world.